one on development of doctrine, like a little short, and you have to do is you have to be very precise when you talk about development of doctrine. Very, very precise. So I didn't hear Lofton exactly. Exactly after you said Michael Lofton froze. So you have to be very precise. I mean, this isn't me like picking on Michael Lofton. I've done this with like a bunch of different people. So I mean, this just happens to be Michael talked about it. Michael made a clip about it, and I don't think it's precise. And I think it's helpful to be precise about these things because, and I think Michael had a very major omission when he was talking about this. So I'm gonna be charitable. I'm gonna be nuanced. Don't worry, guys. Don't worry, Father Brown. Father Brown's always here when I talk about Michael Lofton. Is it like, do you have, do you have like a sixth sense about Wagner's talking about Lofton again? I need to come here and make sure he's nice. I'm nice. I'm being nice. Okay. So this is Lofton's video. Does something change when doctrine develops? So I hope you guys can hear it. If not,
So when it comes to development, there's always something twofold that's going on. There's continuity with the substance of the doctrine, and then there is something new with its articulation or application. With the development, that is always the case. So there's a twofold aspect. There's continuity and there's discontinuity. There's continuity and reform, as Benedict would call it. He spoke of the hermeneutic of reform as opposed to the hermeneutic of discontinuity. So what remains the same in doctrine when it comes to development is always the substance of the teaching. But there is something new, there is something innovative, either in the language in which it's expressed or in how it's applied to a new situation.
okay. So according to Michael, he says that there are two types of development. So I think I'm going to be fair here by in the way in which I'm explaining what he said. There's two kinds of developments. One, he's going to say a development. I think I've explained this kind of to you guys before. He calls this a development, but a change from applying the same principle in one way to applying the same principle in another way, depending on changing concrete circumstances. So this might be in one society, there might be a requirement for the death penalty due to keeping the common good. Another society, this crime might not have the same requirement. It changes, but the circumstances change, and therefore the application changes. But the abstract principles, before you descend into particulars, those abstract principles remain the same. So he says that's one type of development. The other type of development, he says, is a difference in articulation. So Michael says that it actually articulates the same notion, but it clarifies. So on the one hand, I'll start with the sort of claim about law. That's not a development. It's not a development of doctrine at all. In fact, I think it's quite erroneous in misleading, not purposely misleading, obviously, but misleading to claim that this is a type of development. It's not a type of development. This has to do not with something in fundamental theology, which is when we talk about development of doctrine, we're discussing specifically something in De Locis, Theologicis, or maybe we discuss it when it comes to the articles of faith, the authority of the church. But when it comes to the differing applications of law, that's purely in a study of jurisprudence. It's a study of what's called de legibus. So the types of different laws that we have, like the difference between the sort of primary principles and applications and circumstances. So that all has to do with law. So like, for example, I can make a law today, and then a circumstance can change tomorrow, and I can just change the law. Or actually, I can make an equivalent law that kind of equally or maybe better fits the circumstances based on the same principles without any sort of changing circumstance. It doesn't require any development at all. So this isn't a development at all, because development has to do with the substance of what is taught, not with any sort of application of principle. So now on the other side of things, he talked about development in terms of the clarification of notions. So it's very clear what he means here is he means explaining something better. Now, historically, this is not how the theologians have spoken of the development of doctrine. They say that there are 3 degrees of evolution. So I'll start with I'm probably getting these backwards anyways, but whatever. So the 3rd degree of evolution No, I'll just, you guys aren't going to ever read like the technical treatises on the degrees of evolution. I'll just do 1, 2, 3 because I feel like it. So the first degree of evolution, and I'm doing this backwards, is transformistic evolution. So transformistic means that the proposition expressed here and the proposition expressed here are really distinct. So, for example, if I went from the proposition that, let's say, John is on fire, to the proposition that John will be combusted, since technically speaking, by the power of God, the combusted power of fire and fire itself can be separated. Those are actually two completely different judgments. So they're really distinct judgments. Or we could say like the Blessed Virgin or Mary had a child, therefore Mary had relations with a man, something like that. We know that actually the virgin birth can go above the laws of nature. Really distinct premise, really distinct conclusion. And these may go off of physical laws, like the examples I gave, or moral laws, like Sarah is a mother, therefore Sarah loves her children. That's a moral law. We are morally certain that happens, although obviously there can be exceptions due to human wickedness. So these are the premise is really distinct from the conclusion. So the second degree of evolution is what's called metaphysico-connexive virtuality. Although you don't really need to know that term. Basically, you need to know that the premise and the conclusion is virtually contained in the premise. So what do I mean by virtually? So they're really identical. They're really connected. But the notion which is expressed in the premise and in the conclusion are not the same notion. So that may sound like a little bit Jesuitical or whatever. But for most of our arguments actually work this way. So for example, if I said, God is spiritual, therefore God is immortal, actually spirituality and immortality, while expressing different concepts, so they're distinct in that way, are really connected in the sense that one implies necessarily the other. So in theology, almost all of this is why it's such a major omission, is almost all of theology are these type of virtual connections where we're drawing forth what is implicitly contained, virtually contained, which is not the same as clarifying the same notion. It's not the same as giving a more solid definition. Not the same. No, you're actually really drawing forth actual conclusions from these premises which are given. That's what theology is. That's the part of the dignity of theology, is we're able to investigate those things which are really connected to the notions which are revealed to us in Revelation. So what's the third degree of evolution? So the third degree of evolution is what Michael was talking about. So that is merely what's called the formal confused. So the formal confused means that the notion expressed in the premise and the notion expressed in the conclusion. Yeah, I know, Father Brown, Jesuitical. The notion expressed in the premise, notion expressed in the conclusion is the same notion. Not only the same thing, but the same notion. So the same aspect of the thing is being expressed. So this, for example, would be something like Jesus is a man, men are rational animals, therefore Jesus is a rational animal. In this case, what we're doing is, rather than drawing forth any new concept outside of man, we are defining, properly speaking, the concept. So this is actually, it's technically called improper elation, to go from this, or explanatory syllogism is another word for it, where rather than drawing forth a new conclusion, you're actually just explaining the premise, the conclusion with the minor premise. So I hope that makes sense. But what Michael said here, it wasn't correct. There is that third species of evolution. Well, there's that second species of evolution that we talked about. The first that we talked about isn't doctrinal development at all. We don't do that in theology. That's going outside of the deposit of faith, and therefore it's not even in the scope of theology. But the second and the third, he only caught the third. He didn't catch the second. And the second is actually the most important.